Welcome.
And welcome. It's very good to see you, even though you can't see me. So we're going to jump straight in. Phantom Menace 5M9 promoting Jar Jar. It's also called War Plans as well. So the first section of this is just a link, really, a sort of dark, sparse link until bar 8, which is basically the Trade Federation and Sidious plotting, and a reference to Maul to be mindful. Anyway, but it's all sort of block chordal stuff. This one's sort of a slightly more rare first inversion block chordal. Usually it's second inversions, and it does actually then go to second inversions here. So we have F sharp minor, F minor, D minor, all of these sort of things, all moving in sort of block chords like that. B flat minor, A minor, those sorts of things as well. So I have got some of the orchestral stuff here. Here we go. And then it dies away without the wind. Well, after this little bit. Great sort of fruit, it's called in the trombones, those sort of rather fruity brass tones. And then it goes into our little favourite bit. Now, interestingly enough, this theme doesn't really appear anywhere else that I can think of, which is probably why Frank Lehman doesn't list it necessarily, but it's used a lot in different sort of franchise material, like Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, which is sort of an app that you can download. And I've just called it Gungans Prepare for Battle, because that's what they're doing. It's quite sort of sprightly, and it really is very distinctive as well. There we go. So, yeah, what I love about this is that this sort of rather interesting ostinato-y figure, which starts on A, but then it sort of migrates. That's not really a musical term, but I've just used it. Migrates to C, and then it does the same sort of thing, modulates really to E as well. So, yeah, it's just a nice little sprightly tune. Again, it's harmonised here in a first and second inversion chord shape mix. So we got first inversions here, then it switches to second inversion like that, and it uses very few. Why have I put D flat there? That's a B flat. So yeah, it uses very few bits of material. Like that. Just really all semitones pretty much, apart from the B flat to C. So interesting, and above A as well. So when it finishes, we've got this sort of B flat. This sort of idea, 420. So it's one of the Star Wars chords, you know, a major seventh chord, but it's never in. It's never in that, because that just sounds far too much like jazz. But that's okay. That's okay. And that's also, in this instance, how it's configured. B flat major 7 over A. And you can also see different sorts of, you know, little flat 6 inflections with a B flat Lydian. So B flat Lydian exactly the same as B flat, but with a sharp 4. And it's just got this little flat 6 inflection that I've called it there. There's no point redefining that chord, I think. And then there's a phrase modulation, so it starts in B flat and then it moves to D. And it actually changes the root note to C when it gets to the C major. Wow, a diatonic chord without anything else added to it for 1 bar. then it does have stuff added to it. And in which case, actually, this is interesting. We've got an A flat over C at that point as well. So we'll just wind back slightly. So here it is. So yeah, it's that little A flat over C at that point, which is really, really lovely. And then we've got this E pedal at this point. Notice the slight change in ostinato. B Lydian. Nice, and it's like a little sort of E harmonic minor flourish right at the end, which is really effective. It's just 1 beat, and then we've got this sort of pedal E, which then leads us into an octatonic section, T transposed by no semitones. So it's an octatonic, you know, untransposed, but it's basically octatonic on A with a tone. So all of those notes are derived from it. Remember, this is bass clef at that point. Let's just put another one in there just to make it really obvious. So here we go. That really nice raspy wood mute sound. And now another phrase modulation. Phrase modulation is just there's no attempt to get from one key to another. It just literally starts a new key at that point. So we're sort of in an all octatonic bit at this point as well. So that's why I've called it 418A. There's dim chord, G dim, but with a major seventh over the top of it as well. And then we're back into a sort of G pedal at this point, with other block chords above. At this time, mixture of second inversion roots. And nice that we've got this sort of little bassoon here, and which is E flat, and then we've got D major as well, which is pure 6Z19B. This two different chords a semitone apart, major chords a semitone apart, and he really plays on that idea later on. So we've got all of these sort of they're not quite hexatonic moments. In fact, most of them are sort of Hungarian minor. So with those notes that we've already got, so we've got E flat and D. If we add a C sharp to it, it becomes a G Hungarian minor at that point, which is really, really interesting. Let's just listen to it. It's more obvious right at the end, actually, because there's lots of this sort of trill stuff, so that slightly obscures some of those notes because of the trill. But then we're back into it really here, and then Williams cleverly uses this C sharp as a pivot note to get to F sharp minor, which is really, really nice. I really like that. I think that's extremely effective. Oh, hello. Whoa. That's what happens if you press the space bar. What happens if you press the space bar too many times. Yeah, so we've got that modulation at that point, which is rather nice. So it's a bit further on here. Yeah, it feels G minor at that point. Still sort of G, really. Now F sharp minor, so there's a real semitonal shift. And indeed, the tune is just repeated, a semitone lower. Yeah, so we got real interest here. So this one's interesting because the chords here, where we have identified a G chord, I should probably label that a little bit more clearly. The reason I'm not labelling this one is that it's just, it looks like a sort of chromatic neighbouring note to G, and the real interest is in the D flat against the G together, which forms a Petrushka chord. Here we go. So the an original one, or I suppose this is the untransposed version, A flat, like that. So with this one, it sounds very different in that configuration, with a sort of open spacing with the trombones and bassoons, and then second inversion spacing in the upper wind at that point. But really, really nice and very clever. And then it changes here, where we get a bitonal chord. This one actually, I suppose B flat again is no real reason to write 522, but again it's a sort of neighbouring note to the A, which doesn't last that long actually, but it forms what's called a diatonic hexachord. In other words, if you put all of the notes in order, then they make the start of a major scale, which is interesting. So we've got B, D, and F sharp, but that's interspersed with A major as well. So we've got those going on, which is really nice. And then definitely worth talking about this. Really complex, actually. So let's dissect it. So back here, we have an A minor with a major 7th chord. So that's part of the Star Wars DNA. So in this instance, it's with first inversion. So let's put that in as well, just to be clear. And we can see it quite clearly in the harp at that point. We can see how 419 really relates to that Hungarian minor. Also 6Z19B, but in this case it's more Hungarian minor. And then we've got a sort of, completely different notes that really sort of getting in the way of that, with this sort of B pedal on the 2nd degree of the scale, which makes it very ambiguous at that point. Let's try and take it back if I can. It's just before then. So that's the beginning of the page. Yeah, it's almost as if the A descends a semitone to the G sharp at that point. It just sounds so much like a Sibelius symphony, and I just can't think of which one. Possibly Sibelius 2? But anyway, an interesting passage here, which is complicated. So we've got D sharp. So it's loosely sort of D sharp, B major. Which then becomes a C major chord, but in first inversion. So and then we've got this really lovely appoggiatura onto a B flat half diminished chord with E in the bass. And it sort of really wants to go there, but it doesn't. And actually keeps going down, which is really interesting. So what's voice-leaning-wise here? We've got that going on. Sort of going loosely there. And then loosely... Yeah, just going down by tone at that point. So it's a really interesting sort of... another first inversion. So here we got sort of E5, so there's no third to that chord with the C sharp in there. So ambiguous. And then it really shifts at that point, which is interesting. So we've got C sharp and E and B. There's a real shift at that point, a shift in colour, and unexpectedly. I suppose the only sort of thing that we got to go on is this little sort of voice register exchange, where the bass note actually becomes part of the inner note. And that becomes a really large appoggiatura to a very ambiguous chord at that point, F sharp 7 with a flat 9, I guess, to a sort of E flat 7 with an E. I suppose you could also argue it's one of them with a flat 9, so E flat with a flat 9, possibly E flat 7 with a flat 9. But in sort of 5th inversion, I suppose, 4th inversion. Ugh, I lose count. But anyway, the E in the bass, and then really, really extraordinary chord, which is a part of the Star Wars DNA, 418B. We've seen that a number of times. I think I might start calling it sharp 4 rather than a diminished 5th, because it seems more likely to be sharp 4, but it doesn't resolve. It remains unresolved. And then we've got notes from the Hungarian minor in E. You can usually see it because of these little semitonal moments as well. So that's interesting. So he's got Hungarian minor on E, but harmonising at an A minor chord, but with a sharp 4. Yeah, that seems to work amazingly well. Would never have thought of that. And then we've got this really special chord here, which is A flat 7 with a flat 9 and a flat 13. Wow. Really extraordinary. And what I've done is I've put in what we've got. So it effectively root, then the flat 13, then the flat 9, then the 3rd, then the 5th, and then the 7th. Really interesting how that's voiced. Extraordinary, really. And it's almost Hungarian minor, but it's not quite. It has this sort of sharp 6. And in fact, so the Hungarian on A would not have an F sharp in it. It would have an F natural. But as soon as you put the F sharp in, you get this scale, which is a harmonic major on E, called 732B. So, yes, really extraordinary. But again, it's not something which is not listed. And this always gives me sort of confidence that, you know, he is playing around with pitch class sets and scale forms which are, although advanced and chromatic and everything else, they are not unobtainable. You don't just sort of pick them out. They're definitely pre-planned, and something that he would have had in his own musical vocabulary as well, and then a very sort of long pause at the end. It's a really nice little cue, actually, and I think it works really, really well. Let's just have a listen to the end sequence as well. Classic. Strings take over. Wonderful chord. Brilliant. Absolutely lovely. Wonderful. I really hope you enjoyed that. There's a lot in there to digest. One of the things which is interesting is this sort of jaunty theme with, you know, let's call it wrong note bass, but it's still it ends up being part of a Star Wars chord. So maybe working backwards from the cadence point to get there is an interesting method. And then just using phrase modulation to do another one. So it's, 2 minutes 26 worth of music. So he probably wrote that in a whole day, I would have thought. Really interesting, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We'll see you next time.